So the book is out, Be the Change, the Paul and Sheila Wellstone story. So you've learned a lot from your interviews of people who knew Paul and Sheila.
Yep.
Now, do you get to vote this year?
We do not.
Unfortunately, no.
We're both born in May of 1999, so we will be 17 and a half at this year's presidential election, which is rather frustrating because we're both pretty politically active.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to influence people through this book too.
Hopefully.
Well, that would be wonderful.
Helping them, young people, realize that set aside that cynicism. Take a look at the real people who are working for all of us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How would you describe what the book is about?
Well, the book is about Paul and Sheila Wellstone, and it's pretty much a straightforward biography of them. We start when Paul was a child, and we work our way through his entire political career up until the tragic plane crash that ended their lives.
We also focus a bit on Sheila Wellstone and her,
For sure.
Yeah, and her progress in making and speaking out about domestic violence and how she really stepped out of the shadows and used her status as like just a senator's wife to really bring out this such a taboo subject.
And she was a powerful person in herself.
She was an incredible woman.
Making advances in ending domestic violence.
Yep. They were both very fierce and passionate people. He was also just an everyday man, and there's Paul was, I don't want to say he was nothing special, but he didn't act special, but he
wasn't entitled.
He was not
Yeah, he wasn't
pretentious.
entitled. Yeah, exactly. Like he knew all of the names of the people who run the elevators at in Congress, and he just was.
He doesn't look down on other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
So, and that's a marvelous thing to realize as you move away from the cynicism that so many people have about politics.
Well, that politicians are people too, and like most people, some of them are very decent. They're actually nice people to hang out with.
And we need to find out which ones they are that are the most decent ones.
Yeah.
And this helps us begin to recognize the decency in not only Paul and Sheila, but other politicians and their spouses and other people active in politics.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I hope that people read this book. And how can they get a copy of it?
Well, they go on to bmondopublishing.com, I believe. Is it .org or .com?
B-Mondo Publishing.
.com, I believe.
.com.
It's also available on Amazon too.
You can order it on Amazon.
Yeah.
Well, I worked along with another reporter on the Mental Health Parity Act, and I think Paul's work on that act is so indicative of the best qualities that he possessed, just overall, in that he was taking on mental health, which is a very controversial and unpopular subject. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And he and Sheila were never afraid to do that, as Sheila proved with domestic violence. And then he worked with Senator Pete Domenici, who is a Republican from New Mexico, which proves that he was always willing to have integrity and work across the aisle. He and Senator Domenici agreed on almost nothing else besides the mental health. They were completely from opposite ends of the political spectrum, but they were able to put that aside and work together to pass something that was really important. And then he was taking on insurance companies, which is not a small opponent to take on. And he was never afraid of that. If he believed that it was important to fight a particular fight, he would take on whoever or whatever he needed to get that done.
Even if he didn't get more votes or get
even
reelected.
If it was not prudent politically.
But he had courage.
He had a lot of courage, and he was very persistent. With the mental health legislation, he had to work for many years before they managed to get a bill passed. And even then, it was not all that he wanted it to be. It provided for...
It never is.
It never is. But after with the success of the Mental Health Parity Act, which was 1996, he continued to work up until his death to add more, to get more help for the mentally ill. And eventually, posthumously, Senator Pete Domenici and several of his colleagues passed the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equality Act in 2008, which is named for both Senator Domenici and Wellstone. Well, and a lot of people with the mental illness have a very personal connection to it. The senator whom Paul collaborated with, Senator Domenici, his daughter also suffered from schizophrenia.
Yeah.
And that was a way that they really managed to draw huge bipartisan support for that bill, because people recognized that it was far more important than any party lines. It was about something really serious that affected millions of Americans.
Now, given the state of politics in America today, what kinds of concerns do you have about this world that you are inheriting?
And I think also with Brexit, it demonstrates a lot of kind of disturbing movements that are happening right now, where there's a movement back towards nationalism and isolationism, and people are becoming more interested in having a more insular worldview. And I think one of the things that I admire most about Paul Wellstone was that he managed to be both a very local politician. He was always rooted in his Minnesota. You know, he knew where he came from and he knew who his constituents were, but he still was able to look at the bigger picture, to recognize that he wasn't just the senator from Minnesota. He was also a senator for the United States of America.
That's
and
right.
I feel like a lot of politicians have lost track of that, and they've either become too broad in their political mindset, or they've become too specific. They just latch themselves on to one very specific point of view, and they're not flexible, and they're not smart about looking at the bigger picture.
Many times they've latched onto a point of view that associated with where the money comes from.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's for sure.
There's this idea that you have to get your own legislation passed, and it has to be exactly like that. It's all about winning, and to compromise, it's to lose.
What are your hopes for politics?
Well, Paul was one to really listen to the youth, and he thought it was shocking and awful that youth had, when youth think about politics, they think about being fake and how everyone involved in politics is just a fake person. And Paul tried not to be that person, and I think succeeded.
What is your message for other youth about politics? Maybe you have the same message, do you?
Yeah, probably.
I don't know. I mean, mine is that you can't. It's easy to give into cynicism, but it doesn't accomplish anything. You can sit in the back of your room feeling bad about yourself and feeling bad about the state of politics, and it's not going to make anything better. So at least if you go out there and you speak up for what you believe in and you fight for what you think is right, then you have a chance at affecting. We're lucky enough that we have a system of government where one person actually can affect the bigger outcome.
Thank you. They need to hear that.
Yeah.